It all started on a Tuesday evening, the kind of evening where everything seemed normal but wasn't. My wife, Jessica, had been acting differently for weeks. We'd been married for nearly 5 years, and I thought we were solid. Sure, we had our ups and downs like any couple, but I never imagined she'd be the type to cheat. Yet, her behavior slowly began to change. It was subtle at first. I noticed it in the little things, her late-night work calls, the way she'd suddenly become obsessed with her appearance, and how she'd often be glued to her phone. At first, I attributed it to stress. Jessica works in marketing and she's always been driven, but lately, her passion seemed to morph into something darker. Our conversations became shallow. She'd give me one-word answers, barely engaging when I tried to connect with her. It was like I was sharing a space with a stranger. I brushed off my instincts for weeks, convincing myself that I was overreacting. But then I found the breadcrumbs. One night, as I was cleaning up after dinner, I decided to put away some of her things that were scattered around the kitchen. That's when I noticed a receipt tucked away in the back of the junk drawer. It was for a hotel, an expensive one, and the date matched up with a weekend she'd claimed she was going on a work retreat. My heart dropped. I felt sick. I could almost hear the gears in my head turning, connecting the dots I never wanted to connect. The next few days were a blur. I pretended everything was fine, but inside I was a boiling pot. I started to pay close attention, looking for more signs. I noticed her texting more frequently, always quick to hide her phone when I walked into the room. I began to follow her social media more closely, looking for clues. That's when I found a picture. A couple of friends tagged her and this guy I didn't recognize. A handsome guy in his early 30s with a charming smile and an arm draped around Jessica. The caption read, "Had a blast at the bar, work hard, play hard." I felt rage and betrayal coursing through my veins. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. It was all I could think about. I was caught in this storm of emotions, swinging from anger to despair. The idea that the woman I loved, the one I had built a life with, could be betraying me was a gut punch I wasn't prepared for. I knew I had to confront her, but how do you even begin to address something so shattering? The night finally came when I could no longer hold my tongue. Jessica came home late, the usual sultry scent of perfume accompanying her. I could see her flushed cheeks and the sparkle in her eyes. Something was off. The moment she walked through the door, I knew I had to act. I waited for her to settle down and then I dropped the bomb. "Jessica, we need to talk about your weekend trip," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos inside. Her expression changed instantly. She tensed, eyes darting around looking for an escape. "What do you mean?" she replied, her tone defensive, almost chipper, as if trying to play it cool. I pulled out the receipt like a trump card, her face drained of color. "What's this? A work retreat at a hotel?" She stammered, "Oh, that was just for a team meeting." "A team meeting that requires a hotel? What the hell, Jessica?" My heart raced, waiting for the truth to spill from her lips. She tried to play it off, spewing excuses and desperate lies, saying I was overreacting, insisting that I was being paranoid. I could see the flicker of panic in her eyes, but she was skilled at deflection. "You know how stressful work can be. I didn't want to bother you with it." As she spoke, I felt the shock wearing off, replaced by a burning anger. I couldn't believe the audacity of her words. The confrontation escalated as she scrambled to deny everything. I pushed further, exposing her lies, and finally the truth tumbled out. "I've been seeing someone else," she confessed, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I didn't want to hurt you." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I was left reeling, trying to comprehend the betrayal. The emotional aftermath was like a black hole sucking me in. I felt anger, sadness, disbelief. I had to process this betrayal. How could she do this to me? How could she throw away everything we'd built? I tried to focus on the whirlwind of thoughts. I wanted revenge to make her feel the pain she had inflicted on me. But as I sat there, a plan started to form in my mind. If she wanted to play games, I would gladly indulge her. I would lead her straight into a psychological trap she would never forget. This was just the beginning, and I was ready to see this through. The days following that confrontation were a blur of emotions. I went through a turbulent mix of hurt and fury, trying to cope with the revelation of Jessica's betrayal. I felt like I was living in a fog, functioning on autopilot while my mind replayed the scenes of her confession over and over. I couldn't believe she'd chosen to involve another man in our lives, shattering the foundation of trust we had built. In the immediate aftermath, Jessica tried to act like everything was normal. She would come home from work, sometimes even early, trying to be the attentive wife I once knew. But there was a tension in the air that neither of us could ignore. I was a walking time bomb, and she was the one who had lit the fuse. I spent my evenings plotting. My emotions were raw, but I knew I had the upper hand now. She had laid the breadcrumbs for me to follow, and I was determined to lead her into a trap of her own making. The idea formed that I would pretend to forgive her, to give her the illusion that everything was okay. I wanted her to feel secure while I secretly gathered evidence against her. It was a twisted plan, but I needed to see how far she would go, and I wanted her to taste the fear of being caught again. I decided to play along with her lies. One evening, I put on a fake smile as she came home beaming after a meeting with friends. I made dinner, asked her how her day was, and listened to her incessant chatter about work and plans for the weekend. I was the attentive husband, nodding along while my heart screamed for justice. As the days passed, I began to dig deeper. I started to follow her more closely, tracking her movements without her knowledge. I found out more about this guy. His name was Mark. He worked in the same industry and had a reputation for being quite the charmer. Jessica had been seeing him for months, and I was determined to catch them in the act. I didn't want just a confession. I wanted irrefutable proof that she was cheating. The next weekend, I decided to put my plan into action. I told Jessica that I was going on a fishing trip with some friends. It was a half-truth. I was going to keep my distance and observe her while she was with Mark. I made sure she thought I was out of town. I parked a few blocks away from a bar I'd seen her check into on social media. I wore a baseball cap and sunglasses, blending into the shadows. I couldn't believe the emotions that surged through me as I watched her arrive, laughing and carefree. She looked like a different person, the woman I fell in love with, but with a reckless edge. As I sat there, watching her interact with Mark, I felt a rush of adrenaline. They were flirting openly, and it was agonizing to see her so at ease with another man while I was fighting to piece my heart back together. Part of me felt like a voyeur, while another part reveled in the thrill of the hunt. I recorded everything on my phone, capturing the intimate moments they shared, the whispers, the laughter, the touches that signaled a connection I no longer had with her. I stayed hidden until they left the bar together. Watching them walk side by side, I felt rage boiling inside me. I followed them at a distance, my heart racing as they strolled into a nearby hotel. This was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I pulled out my phone once more and recorded them entering the building. My body trembled with a mix of anger and satisfaction. I returned home, feeling like a soldier coming back from battle with the spoils of war. I had the evidence I needed, and now it was time to execute phase 2 of my plan. I decided to confront Jessica again, but this time I would have proof. When she returned home the next day, I acted as if nothing had happened. I helped her with her bags, asked about her weekend, and even offered to make her favorite dinner. She seemed oblivious to the storm brewing beneath my calm exterior. Just as we sat down to eat, I pulled out my phone and opened the video. "Hey Jess, I have something to show you," I said, making sure my voice was steady. Her face paled as she realized what I was doing. "What is that?" she stammered. I pressed play, the laughter and flirtation echoing in the room. I watched as her expression shifted from confusion to horror. The realization began to sink in. I had caught her in the act, and it was all laid out before her. "Do you care to explain this?" I asked, my voice low and steady. She stumbled over her words, desperately trying to find excuses, but I wasn't interested in her pathetic attempts to justify her actions. The rage I felt was boiling over, but I needed to keep my composure. This was my moment. I had to make her feel the weight of what she had done. "I can't believe you would do this to me," I said, calmness laced with bitterness. "You left breadcrumbs, Jess. I followed them right to you, and now here we are." The reality of her betrayal crashed down on her like a wave. I saw the facade crack, and I knew the psychological trap had worked. She was about to realize the depth of her mistakes, and I would relish every moment of her struggle to escape the consequences of her choices. The room was tense, each second stretching out like an eternity. I watched as Jessica's face went from disbelief to shock and finally to despair. She tried to stammer out a defense, but her words were hollow, echoing in the silence around us. "It was a mistake. I didn't mean to hurt you," she blurted out, her voice trembling. I couldn't help but scoff. "A mistake? You've been seeing him for months, Jess. This isn't just a slip-up, it's a betrayal." I felt a wave of satisfaction wash over me, seeing her squirm under the weight of her own lies. She stood there, tears streaming down her cheeks, her makeup beginning to run. I almost felt sorry for her, but then I remembered the laughter she shared with Mark, the way she had looked at him, like I hadn't mattered at all. "I don't want to lose you," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "You already did," I shot back, feeling surge of anger rise within me. "You chose someone else over me. You chose to lie, to cheat, and to manipulate the very trust we built together. How do you think I should feel right now?" "I was confused," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know how to tell you. Don't you dare put this on me." I yelled, my heart pounding in my chest. "You knew exactly what you were doing. You were playing with fire, and now you're burned." She crumpled into a chair, burying her face in her hands. I felt the knot in my stomach twist tighter. I wanted her to suffer, to understand the gravity of her actions, but part of me also felt a pang of sorrow. This was the woman I loved, and now I was watching her collapse under the weight of her own deception. I took a deep breath, trying to regain my composure. "What were you thinking? Did you really believe you could keep this a secret, that I wouldn't find out?" "I didn't want to hurt you," she cried, looking up at me with desperation in her eyes. "I thought it was just a fling, but things got out of hand. I didn't mean for it to turn into this. Out of hand." I echoed, incredulity lacing my words. "You put your hands on another man, Jess. That was a choice. You made that choice over and over again." She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. It was as if she had run out of excuses, and I could see the defeat wash over her. "I'm so sorry," she finally managed to say, but the apology felt empty, meaningless in the face of her betrayal. The weight of this moment was almost unbearable. I had to make a decision, and it wasn't going to be easy. Did I want to salvage our marriage, or was it time to cut my losses and walk away? I had spent countless nights dreaming of a future with her, and now that future felt like ashes in my hands. "Why should I believe you?" I said finally, my voice low and steady. "You've betrayed my trust in the worst way possible. How can you expect me to just forgive and forget? This isn't something you can brush under the rug." "I'll do anything," she pleaded, her eyes wide and filled with tears. "I'll go to counseling, I'll cut him out of my life, just please don't leave me." Her desperation pulled at my heartstrings, but I had to remind myself of the pain she had caused me. It was easy for her to say those things in the moment. The real test would come later. "I need time to think," I said, feeling a mixture of anger and sadness flood my being. Jessica nodded, her face stricken with grief. She didn't try to argue anymore. I could see the defeat in her posture, the weight of her actions settling heavily on her shoulders. She was reaping the consequences of her choices, and I was determined to make sure she understood the severity of what she had done. For the next few days, I threw myself into work, trying to distract myself from the emotional whirlwind I was caught in. I couldn't process what had happened, and every time my mind drifted back to Jessica's betrayal, I felt a surge of rage. I thought about Mark and how easily he had slipped into my life, how he had stolen my wife's affections. I started mapping out my revenge, slowly piecing together a plan to expose her in a way that would not only hurt her but also mark a turning point in our relationship. I wanted her to experience the fear of losing everything she had taken for granted. I decided that if I was going to make a move, it had to be calculated and impactful. I reached out to a few friends, the ones I trusted the most, and shared my situation with them. Their reactions varied. Some were supportive, while others suggested I should walk away. But I wasn't ready to make that decision just yet. I needed to see this through. I needed to confront the truth of our relationship, and that meant putting Jessica in a position where she would have to face the consequences of her actions. One evening, as I sat in my living room stewing over my thoughts, Jessica finally approached me, her expression tentative. I know I messed up and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix this, she said softly. I looked at her, seeing a mix of regret and determination in her eyes. Did she really mean it, or was this just another act? I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still playing a game and it was time for me to play mine. Okay, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. If you're serious about fixing this, then let's talk. She nodded, her eyes brightening with hope. But I knew this conversation would be different. I had plans that would set the stage for a confrontation she wouldn't see coming. The psychological trap was set, and soon enough, she would realize exactly what she had lost. As I navigated the waters of this new phase of our relationship, I felt a strange sense of control. Jessica believed she could charm her way back into my good graces, but I had a different agenda. I wanted her to understand the true gravity of her actions, and that meant leading her deeper into this psychological trap I had set for her. We began having nightly conversations about our marriage. I listened as she poured out her heart, expressing her regrets and promising to change. I played the role of the forgiving husband while secretly gathering more evidence about her deceit. I began following her more closely, observing her interactions with Mark and the way she tried to maintain her facade. Each time I caught her in a lie, I made a mental note. One evening, I decided to confront her with my findings. I had compiled a list of her lies, her excuses, and the evidence I had collected. I wanted to make sure she understood the extent of her betrayal, and I planned to do this in a way that would hit her hard. Jess, I began, my voice steady but firm, I want to talk about trust. She looked at me, a hint of confusion flickering across her face. What do you mean? I mean trust in our relationship. You've shattered it and now we need to rebuild it, I said, gauging her reaction. She nodded earnestly, her eyes wide. I know, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make it right. I took a deep breath, preparing myself for what was to come. Then let's start with honesty. I've been keeping track of everything, Jess. Your phone calls, your late nights, your meetings with Mark. I have proof of your betrayal. Her expression shifted, the vulnerability replaced by a flash of panic. What do you mean? I pulled out my phone, displaying the texts I had screenshotted, the video from the bar we had argued about, and the receipts for the hotel stays. The evidence was overwhelming, and I could see her defenses crumbling. I know you've been lying to me all this time, and it's time to come clean. If you want to repair this, you have to face the truth, I said, throwing down the gauntlet. She glanced at the screen, her face paling as she processed the reality of what I had laid before her. I didn't mean for it to get this far, she whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. Then why did you let it? Why did you choose to betray me? I pressed, feeling the weight of my own anger bubbling to the surface. I was lost. I thought it was just a fling, a way to escape my own insecurities, she sobbed, her voice trembling. I didn't think I'd hurt you like this. Jess, you didn't just hurt me. You tore apart everything we built together. You threw it away for a thrill, a temporary escape. I don't know if I can ever trust you again, I said, trying to contain the hurt I felt. She fell silent, overwhelmed by the truth I had laid bare. I'm so sorry, she said again, but it felt different this time. It was raw and desperate, but I needed more than just words. I want you to understand what you've done. I need you to feel the consequences of your choices, I said, my voice steadier now. I want you to write a letter. I want you to detail everything that happened with Mark, from the first time you met him to the day you decided to come clean. I want you to be honest about your feelings and why you chose to betray me. Her eyes widened in shock. You want me to do what? If you truly want to make this right, then you need to confront your own demons. This isn't just about us. It's about you understanding why you acted the way you did, I replied, watching as a mix of emotions swirled on her face, fear, anger, but also a flicker of realization. After some hesitation, she nodded reluctantly. Okay, I'll do it. Good, I said, feeling a sense of satisfaction wash over me. And once you're done, we'll have another conversation. This time, we'll see if we can move forward. Over the next few days, I observed her closely. She became increasingly anxious as she worked on the letter, the weight of our conversations pressing down on her. I could see her contemplating her choices, the gravity of her betrayal sinking in. When she finally handed me the letter, I could see the tension in her hands. I really hope this helps, she said quietly. I took the letter, feeling a mix of anticipation and dread. As I read through it, I was struck by her honesty, her reflections on what led her to cheat. She laid bare her insecurities, her feelings of inadequacy, and the seductive thrill of an affair. But I couldn't shake the anger I felt. I realized that while she acknowledged her mistakes, I needed to ensure she understood the consequences of her actions. The emotional trap I had set was working, but I wasn't done with my plan yet. Once I finished reading, I looked at her, my expression unreadable. Thank you for being honest, but honesty alone isn't enough. We need to talk about what happens next. Her face was pale, and I could see the fear in her eyes as I laid out the terms. You're going to tell Mark that it's over, complete and total closure. No contact, no lingering feelings. I want to know you're serious about fixing this. I will, she promised, her voice trembling. And then we're going to go to counseling. You'll commit to doing the work to understand why you cheated and how we can rebuild our trust. Otherwise, I'm walking away, I said, my voice firm. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'll do whatever it takes, I swear. I never wanted to lose you. I watched her, feeling the weight of the moment. This was my revenge, not in the way I had initially imagined, but in a way that forced her to confront the full scope of her betrayal. It was a gamble, one that could either lead to the redemption of our marriage or its final collapse. But I was prepared for either outcome. As I lay in bed that night, I felt an odd sense of relief wash over me. I had taken control of a situation that had spiraled out of my hands, and now it was time to see where this path would lead us. Would we emerge stronger, or would the cracks in our relationship prove insurmountable? Only time would tell, but I was ready to face whatever came next. The days turned into weeks as I navigated the aftermath of Jessica's betrayal. It was a roller coaster of emotions, an unpredictable journey filled with hope and uncertainty. Jessica was committed, showing signs of genuine remorse as she reached out to Mark to end their relationship. It was a necessary step, but I could feel the tension in the air, a fragile truce between us as we cautiously approached the prospect of rebuilding. Jessica's phone became an object of scrutiny. I had her passwords, and she willingly gave me access, desperate to prove her loyalty. I had to admit, it felt satisfying to have that power. Every time I glanced at her phone, I was reminded of where we stood. I watched as she deleted photos and messages, her fingers trembling as she confronted the digital remnants of her affair. Each deletion felt like a small victory for me, a step toward reclaiming the trust that had been so brutally shattered. Despite her efforts, I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. The memories of her laughter shared with another man haunted me. I often found myself lying awake at night, replaying those images in my mind, wrestling with the pain that refused to fade. I confronted my feelings head-on, realizing that I was still grappling with anger and sadness. Therapy had become a lifeline for me, a way to untangle the emotions that churned within. I began to understand that I needed to process my pain, not just for myself, but for whatever future Jessica and I might have. Our first counseling session together was tense. I sat across from her, feeling the weight of the moment. The therapist, a kind woman named Dr. McKinley, guided us through the conversation, gently encouraging us to share our feelings. Jessica was visibly nervous, her hands trembling in her lap. I could see the anxiety etched on her face, but I was determined to be honest. I feel betrayed, I said, my voice steady. I feel like I don't even know who you are anymore. Tears pooled in her eyes, but she nodded, understanding the gravity of my words. I know I hurt you. I never wanted to do that. I was stupid and selfish, and I wish I could take it back. Dr. McKinley chimed in, facilitating the dialogue. It's important to acknowledge those feelings, but we also need to explore why this happened. Jessica, can you share more about what led you to seek comfort outside the marriage? As she spoke, I watched her struggle with her emotions. She talked about feeling overwhelmed by work, about her insecurities, and how she had sought validation from Mark. It was hard to listen to her pain, but it was necessary. I began to see glimpses of the woman I fell in love with, the side of her that had been buried beneath layers of guilt and shame. Sometimes I felt like I wasn't enough, she admitted, her voice cracking. I thought maybe I could find something I was missing, but instead, I ended up losing everything that mattered. Hearing her vulnerability stirred something within me. I realized that while her actions were unforgivable, the root of her betrayal stemmed from her own struggles. I wasn't sure if that made it easier to forgive her or made the wound deeper, but I knew we had to keep pushing through this together. After several weeks of therapy, we began to find some footing. Jessica was committed to doing the work, attending sessions without fail and opening up about her feelings. I was hesitant, still feeling the sting of her betrayal, but I wanted to believe in the possibility of healing. The road ahead was still rocky, but we were slowly learning to communicate more openly, to express our fears and desires without fear of judgment. Yet, I felt a lingering need for closure, for a decisive end to the chapter of her infidelity. One day, I made a bold decision. I asked Jessica if she would join me to confront Mark. It seemed extreme, but I wanted to face the man who had disrupted our lives, to see the reality of our situation in a way that felt tangible. To my surprise, Jessica agreed. I want to show you that I'm serious about moving forward, even if it's uncomfortable, she said, her voice steady but laced with anxiety. We arranged to meet Mark at a coffee shop. The day arrived and I could feel my heart racing as we walked into the cafe. Jessica looked anxious and I could see her hands shaking as we approached the table where Mark sat. He wore a casual expression, but I could see the flicker of recognition in his eyes as he spotted us. "Jessica," he said, his voice smooth but slightly surprised. "I didn't expect to see you here." I could feel the tension in the air thicken as Jessica took a seat across from him and I sat next to her. "Mark, we need to talk," she said, her voice firm. He shifted slightly, glancing at me before looking back at her. "Okay, what's this about?" Jessica took a deep breath and I could see the resolve in her eyes. "I want you to know that it's over. I've made a huge mistake and I've chosen to work on my marriage with my husband. I can't see you anymore." His expression shifted, surprise morphing into a mixture of regret and understanding. "I didn't mean to come between you two," he said, looking between us, "but I also don't want to lose what we had." "Too late for that," I chimed in, my voice firm. "You've crossed a line and now it's time for you to back off. Jessica deserves to focus on her marriage and she deserves to heal without you lingering in the shadows." Mark nodded, his face growing somber. "I get it. I'm sorry for what I did. I didn't think about the consequences." Jessica's voice quivered slightly as she added, "I hope you understand how much I regret everything. I need to move on." As she spoke those words, I could see the weight she had been carrying lift just a little. It was a significant moment for both of us. We were standing together, confronting the man who had threatened our marriage, and it felt empowering. After the encounter, we walked back to the car in silence. As we got in, I turned to Jessica, my heart racing. "How do you feel?" She took a deep breath, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Relieved, I think. It feels like I've finally closed that chapter, but there's still a long way to go." I nodded, feeling a flicker of hope. That day marked a turning point for us. We had faced Mark together, and it felt like we were finally on the same team, fighting for our marriage. As we drove home, I realized that though our journey was far from over, we were beginning to rebuild trust. The psychological trap I had set for her had forced her to confront the reality of her choices, and for the first time in a long time, I could see the possibility of a future together. But I knew we had to keep working at it, one step at a time. I was cautiously optimistic, but I also recognized the fragility of our situation. Healing takes time, and I was determined to ensure that we both continued to grow together and individually through this tumultuous journey. I wanted to believe that our love could emerge stronger from the ashes of betrayal, but I knew it would require patience, commitment, and an unwavering willingness to face the truth. As the weeks turned into months, the journey of rebuilding our relationship continued. Jessica and I embraced the uncomfortable conversations and the long nights filled with probing questions and vulnerable admissions. We found ourselves in counseling regularly, each session peeling back layers of hurt and pain, but also revealing the deeper connections we had once shared. I focused on my own healing as well, attending therapy independently. It was vital for me to process the betrayal and not just sweep it under the rug. I learned coping mechanisms to manage my anger and hurt, and I began to recognize the patterns in our relationship that had contributed to the rift. It was a slow, painful process, but I was committed to understanding both sides, the impact of her infidelity and my own shortcomings. Jessica, for her part, showed remarkable growth. I watched her grapple with her insecurities, working hard to understand why she had sought validation outside our marriage. She was honest about her fears, and I could see her genuinely trying to better herself. I admired her courage, but it was also a reminder of the fragility of our situation. At times, I felt the weight of doubt creeping back in. I questioned whether we were truly on the path to recovery or just delaying the inevitable. I had moments when the memories of her betrayal would flood my mind and I'd find myself withdrawing emotionally. But each time Jessica would reach out, reminding me of the commitment we had made to each other and to our marriage. One evening I found myself in the living room, reflecting on how far we had come. Jessica joined me, her expression thoughtful. "You know," she said softly, "I've been thinking a lot about what we've been through. It's been hard, but I feel like I'm finally starting to understand myself better." I nodded, appreciating her honesty. "Me too. I think I've learned that trust is fragile, but it can be rebuilt if we're both willing to put in the effort." She reached for my hand, intertwining our fingers. "You're right. I don't want to lose you again. I need to be better for myself and for us." We spent that night talking about our hopes for the future. With every shared dream, I felt the walls between us begin to crumble. It was clear that we were no longer just surviving the aftermath of her infidelity. We were starting to thrive as a couple. We made plans for a weekend getaway, something to celebrate our progress and remind us why we fell in love in the first place. As we drove to the cabin, I could feel the weight of our past slowly lifting off my shoulders. The trees whipped by in a blur, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. We arrived at the cabin, a cozy little retreat nestled in the woods. It was the perfect place to reconnect, free from the distractions of our daily lives. That first evening we sat by the fire, the flickering flames casting warm shadows around the room. Jessica looked radiant, her laughter infectious as we reminisced about our early days together. I realized in that moment how much I had missed this connection, the simple joy of being in each other's company. "Can you believe how far we've come?" she said, her eyes sparkling. I smiled, knowing that while the path had been fraught with challenges, we had both emerged stronger. "I never thought we'd be here after everything that happened, but I'm grateful we're trying to make this work." Her smile faded slightly, and she nodded. "I know I hurt you deeply, and I'm truly sorry for that. I never want to take you for granted again." I squeezed her hand, feeling the sincerity in her words. "I appreciate that, Jess. Just know that it's going to take time. Trust is hard to rebuild, but I want to work on it together." With the flickering firelight around us, we shared our fears, our hopes, and our dreams for the future. It felt like a new beginning, a chance to not just heal but to create something stronger than before. The next few days were spent exploring the area, hiking, and simply enjoying one another's company. We talked about our future, about having children, and what kind of life we wanted to build together. For the first time since her betrayal, I felt excitement about what lay ahead instead of fear. As we packed up to return home, I realized that I had shifted in my thinking. I could no longer see Jessica solely through the lens of her betrayal. I began to see her as the partner I had chosen, someone who was actively working to make amends and grow. When we returned home, we continued our healing journey with renewed energy. We established new routines, prioritized open communication, and even began monthly date nights to keep the spark alive. One evening, as we sat together on the couch, watching a movie, I took a moment to reflect on our journey. "You know, Jess," I said, turning to face her, "I've learned a lot from this experience, about you, about myself, and about love. It's not just about the good times, it's also about how you face the storms together." She nodded, her eyes glistening with emotion. "I wouldn't trade this journey for anything. It's shown me what truly matters." And in that moment, I knew we were on the right path. The psychological trap I had set had forced Jessica to confront her demons, and in turn, it had allowed me to confront my own. Together, we were rewriting our story, one filled with understanding, empathy, and a renewed commitment to each other. As we embraced, I realized that while the scars of betrayal would always remain, they could serve as reminders of our strength and resilience as a couple. We had faced adversity and emerged not just intact but stronger than ever. The future was still uncertain, but I was ready to embrace whatever came our way, hand in hand with the woman I loved.